Alright, welcome back. Video about all the required documents in one place. Alright, so starting off with the Declaration of Independence, there's not too much here. I think they're going to focus on main ideas being natural rights, popular sovereignty, and social contract. These are the foundation of governmental power. So I have a couple quotes here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. So you have this idea of rights that are not bestowed by people, but rather that these come from somewhere above, whether it's God or nature or otherwise. So you have this idea of natural rights. You also then have the idea that governments are instituted among men that derive their powers from the consent of the governed. So people are the source of power, that's popular sovereignty. Social contract is that governments, again, come from men and that their job is to secure and protect the natural rights that men have. Alright, so we have the Articles of Confederation, so the first system of government pre-Constitution. Under the Articles, each state was sovereign, so they had the ultimate authority and power. In the Federal Congress, each state had one vote, so all the states were equal, and it had to be unanimous to do things. So again, you see how each individual state had a significant amount of power. Congress could not tax. They also couldn't regulate interstate commerce. Congress could, however, declare war. They could make treaties. They could raise an army, coin, and borrow money. So essentially notice that what they can do is they can do foreign policy. They couldn't really make domestic policy. They can raise an army, but they couldn't tax. So they were reliant on voluntary donations, contributions from the states. So they could tell them, hey, we're raising an army, we need this amount of money, but they couldn't actually enforce that. There was no executive or judicial branch at the national or federal level. So states were the ones who could impose tariffs on other states. States could also create their own money, and they could even ignore federal treaties. So again, states being sovereign here. We then move on to the Constitution, which established a limited government. So it said, here are the things that government can do, or the federal government can do. If it's not mentioned here, then it belongs to either states or to the private citizens, to the people. Some of the basic ideas that they put into this government included separation of powers, checks and balances, the idea that it's a representative form of government, and federalism, so dividing power between national, state, and local governments. This is super brief because the Unit 1 review video is pretty much all about this. So check that video out to get much more information on the Constitution and all the things you need to know about it. Alright, so now we get to the Federalist Papers. We have 4 of them in our required documents. So Federalist number 10, this one we're talking about, so remember the Federalist side was in favor of the Constitution. So this is the pro argument for the Constitution, why it would be good. Federalist number 10 argues that factions are the biggest threat facing the new republic. And he defines, James Madison here writing Federalist 10, defines a faction as a group of citizens united by an interest adverse to the rights of other citizens. So meaning a group who didn't want what's best for the public, who was actually against the rights of other people. He said that that would be the biggest threat to the nation. We can't get rid of factions, however. He says that they're natural. We can't remove the causes of them as long as people are different, have unequal amounts of money, as long as people have different opinions, we'll always have factions. So you can't destroy factions without destroying liberty. So rather than try to eliminate factions, we have to control the negative effects of such factions. He says if we don't, well, one way that people might try to do this would be through democracy, but he says democracy can't handle factions because you'll have a majority faction because they'll just win the election. So democracy, you have a vote and the winning side gets to make the policy. So he says democracy would lead to a tyranny of the majority. The majority would just tyrannize minorities and take away their rights at will. So Madison's solution, and so it's here highlighted for you, a large republic is the best way to control factions and protect minority rights while maintaining majority rule. So we want a majority of people to be able to make policy and to influence policy. However, we don't want that majority to be able to trample minority rights. He says by having a large republic, will have so many factions, that's why the large part is important, which will dilute the power of each individual faction and diminishes the chance for any single faction to dominate the government. So we should have a larger republic, and we should have a republic instead of a democracy, because we'll have representatives who should have the public's best interests at heart, these enlightened statesmen, that kind of thing, to do this. All right, so Federalist number 51. The main idea here is Madison's arguing for checks and balances and separation of powers. So you have that highlighted, so let's go back to how and why he does that. Well, you have the famous quote, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. You must first enable the government to control the governed and oblige it to control itself." So because men are fallible and imperfect, we need government because people will do bad things. But the people who will be in our government aren't perfect either. They are also people who can do bad things, so we need to limit their power. So we need to have government to limit people because they do bad stuff, but we need to limit the power of people in government because they can do bad stuff too, essentially. So his solution is ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So divide power up, separate it, make 3 branches. So we have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches. And then give each of them some power, but give them each some power over the others as well. So each branch can check the others because they will jealously guard their own power and not want the other branches to take away their power. So they'll each step up and defend their powers and in turn limit the other branches. So he argues that this will be a successful way to limit the power of government. He also does go on to add a check within a check, or argue for a check within a check, which is that since the legislative branch or Congress is the strongest branch, remember that's what they thought at the time, its power needs to be divided into 2 houses to further weaken it. So within Congress, we have the House and the Senate. So bills have to pass both. So again, this check within a check, you see a further limiting of power. All right, so Brutus number 1 is going to argue the opposite position. He is going to argue against ratifying the Constitution, prefers for power to be held by the people in smaller, more local governments, whether that be state or municipalities, argues in favor of democracy, so people being able to directly vote on things, and part of that means that it needs to be a smaller government. He offers some warnings. He says that once people give up power to this new federal government, they'll never get it back. He also says he was particularly worried about Article 1, Section 8, the necessary and proper clause, aka the elastic clause. He says this gives the federal government, quote, absolute and uncontrollable power, justifying the passing of almost any law. He is absolutely right that it has expanded federal power tremendously. He's not exactly right because it hasn't allowed them to do anything. Remember, the necessary and proper clause has to be related to Congress's explicit or expressed powers. So they are able to make additional laws, but they do have to be linked to the express powers of Congress. He says the power to tax could lead to a tyrannical federal government. Standing armies could lead to the destruction of liberty, so he opposes both of those powers. So again, you see he would have preferred something like the Articles of Confederation. He predicts that federal governments will eventually destroy state governments, and he points to the historical fact at that time, which is that only small republics have ever been successful. And so whereas Madison wants a large republic with diverse people, he prefers a smaller democracy with people who are similar to themselves. All right, so shifting gears to Federalist number 70, Hamilton here is arguing in favor of a unitary executive, meaning a single one-person president, not a council. So why does he argue for this? Because that would seem to give a lot of power to one person, which goes against pretty much the rest of the Constitution. So Hamilton says a good government needs an active and decisive executive. If we have multiple people, it's going to lead to indecision, and you'll see coming up that we need somebody that can act quickly, and one person can act more quickly than a council or a group. He says that if the executive is weak, it will lead to an inefficient government. A single president is more effective than dividing executive power among a group. Again, that decisive nature, that activity, that energy that Hamilton describes that he thinks is necessary. And then he makes an important distinction. He says, while it's good for Congress to move slowly and deliberately, the executive needs to be able to react quickly. So in case of emergency, they should be able to quickly jump into action. And if you have a number of people sharing that power, they won't be able to do so. And then he also, I think in a very clever argument, says that if we only have one president, a unitary executive, it's much easier to assign blame and to hold the president accountable than if there were multiple people on that presidential council. We'll know exactly whose fault it is. They won't be able to point at each other and say, oh, it wasn't me, it was that person. So they will actually be, in fact, more accountable to the people and public opinion as a single executive than as a group. So Federalist number 78 is arguing in favor of life terms for federal judges, in favor of an independent judiciary, and the power of judicial review. So how can Hamilton defend this idea that judges should have life terms? They're not even elected by the people and then they get this job for life. He says, don't worry, they are the least dangerous branch. They don't have power over money to tax, they don't have power to go to war, and they can't even enforce their own decisions. They rely on others to do that for them. The quote there, it has neither force nor will, merely judgment. Now, as far as that judgment goes, Hamilton argues that they must be completely independent to matter. He argues that if Congress or the President could fire them or reduce their pay or put other pressure on them, that they wouldn't be independent, and then they aren't going to do their job. And he describes that job in the last two bullet points. He says the judicial branch's duty must be to declare all acts contrary to the Constitution void. He is saying here, the whole reason we have a judicial branch is to protect the Constitution from, you see the quote there, legislative encroachments, meaning against Congress when they pass something unconstitutional. So we need to have a judicial branch that will strike it down, or when the president does something unconstitutional. So we can't let Congress or the president be able to dictate to them what they can or can't do, to threaten them with removing them, firing them, that kind of thing. So they need to be totally independent to be safeguarded and to actually practice judicial review. All right, and our final required document, letter from a Birmingham jail. How can this be a founding document? The others are all 18th century documents and this one is not. Well, it can be interpreted as demanding the fulfillment of words found in the Declaration and the Constitution, demanding that those words apply to everybody, especially looking at race, because we know that this didn't apply to African Americans for a long, long time, and Martin Luther King Jr. here is demanding that these words finally do apply to everybody. So we see parallels to other of our required documents. The first quote I have there is similar to the argument Brutus made. So he says privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. That's in letter from Birmingham jail. What Brutus said was about once you give somebody power, they don't give it back unless you take it back with force. So similar argument there. Like the Declaration listed the grievances, Birmingham jail also lists some of the bad things that had been happening in the South and that were the cause of why we needed to have this direct action of civil disobedience. He also appeals to moral law and the law of God, natural law, natural rights, just like Jefferson did. So there are some very good parallels there. Some key quotes. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. So you see the viewpoint here, the demand for freedom. Again, demanding that those words of the Declaration, the Equal Protection Clause, are finally fulfilled. He also states that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that an unjust law is no law at all. Therefore, people have a right, and in fact a duty, to not comply with, and in fact to break laws that are unjust. Very similar again to the Declaration when Jefferson talks about people having a right to get rid of a tyrannical government that violates their rights. Alright, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button for me if this video helped you in any way. Hope you guys do great on the AP exam. Till next time, this has been a La Money production.